from a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominick. On today's episode, how to keep calm after realizing that wild animal you've been feeding is actually just your next-door neighbor with rabies. And now, the podcast host who doesn't care about rabies because, like Aaron Rodgers, he is fully immunized, Pete Dominick!
Thank you very much, Pico. Yeah, fully immunized from rabies. Always funny when you say it, Pete. Thank you very much for pressing play on today's episode of Stand Up with Pete Dominick. Can't do it without your support. Thank you to subscribers Michael DePalma, Nick DiFabrizio, Paul Sagar, Paul Alderson, Paul Sheard, Rob Houston. A lot of Pauls. Really appreciate and support the show. Thank you, all three of those Pauls and everybody else. I have got a great guest joining me today. He's one of your favorites. He's a longtime listener, turned caller, turned guest, and one of your favorite guests. It's Bill Boyle. Bill B in D.C. and I had a great conversation. He's on his way to Ireland right now. He's going to be there with a couple of his buddies during St. Patrick's Day, though he says that's just a coincidence. We talked about that. We talked about what's going on in Washington, D.C., and why President Joe Biden vetoed D.C.'s criminal justice reforms. And, of course, we talked about a year of war in Ukraine, and that was a really, really enlightening conversation. I think you're going to love it. But before that, I've got a few other clips, news stories, and Odessa, our intern, joins us for a little bit of good news on today's show. Thank you to Cindy, who emailed me yesterday. Cindy K in Illinois says, Pete, I'm so glad you took a couple days off. Really, you sound great. Your show sounded so good today. And, of course, all the other days. Cindy, you are the sweetest than everybody else. Thank you very much. And don't forget to send me your vitamin N. I'm running a little short on nature photos. Hashtag vitamin N. I include one in every day's subscriber email. That's how you can start your day with a picture of nature taken by a subscriber recently. No man-made objects if you can do it. I make exceptions, but send your vitamin N over to standupwithpete@gmail.com. We should be seeing those spring photos coming from all over the country, all over the world. Oh, and by the way, if you're into gardening or landscaping or being outside in nature and growing things, check out the Stand Up Garden Facebook page. And yesterday I got an email from Matt Olchin, listener, subscriber, and he wants me to do more interviews regarding gardening and nature. And he made all kinds of suggestions in this email, but it's given me the idea to reach out to our friend Kevin Richburg, who is an MIT grad and can grow anything. And so Kevin and I are talking about doing a short series answering your questions about what to grow, where to grow, and how to grow, whatever you want to grow. If you're a gardener or into any of that, we're going to do a short series on that, hopefully pretty soon. So thank you, Matt, for the suggestion, and look for that coming. 3 or 4 episodes or hours taking questions for Kevin, and that should be really interesting, enlightening, and a positive thing to do. I've got all my seedlings growing under lights, and I'm really excited here at the end of winter, the beginning of spring. It's something that really brings me a lot of joy, is seeing all those green shoots come up through the soil cells that I've got planted in the living room this year. How about it? All right. Well, let's get to some of the news in the last 24 hours, brought to you by, we don't have any sponsors, just subscribers. So subscribe to standupwithpete.com right now. Go to standupwithpete.com right now and be a part of our growing community. Hang out with us on Thursday nights, as we always do. All right. Well, what do we got? How do we have it? Here it is. I thought this is a tragic headline, but it's always a good reminder. Highway fatalities are on the rise again. 46,000 people died on the roads in the U.S. in 2022, up 22%, according to numbers released last week. How many of those deaths, folks, involved distracted driving? Well, it's much bigger than the data shows, according to the vice chairman of the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board. Data collection methods are so riddled with problems, he said the reliable estimates are difficult, if not possible, but don't drive and look at your phone. How about it? who am I to say? Who am I to scold you? I don't drive nearly as much as most of you do these days. And when I do, too often, I do look at my phone because I'm a monster. But I read that headline and I thought they were talking to me. So there you go. How about this one? In Ohio, they have filed a federal lawsuit against Norfolk Southern, whose trains keep crashing all over the place. Over the East Palestine, however it's pronounced in Ohio, derailment, according to the state's attorney general. By the way, in Ohio, I also read that a zebra attacked a man, and then they killed the zebra. So I just thought of that because that's another Ohio. Of course that happened in Ohio, weird state you live in. All right, flooding, power outages hit California amid another atmospheric river storm, the, 11th atmospheric river storm of the season. Thoughts out to our California listeners and friends. And, of course, in the Northeast, we got pounded with 2 feet of snow in certain places. I'm going to take the day off on Thursday and go skiing with Chisel D. My dad and I are going to hit Hunter Mountain if anybody wants to join us on Thursday and frolic on the mountains. Cannot wait for that, Pop. All right, and finally, everything is about wokeism and wokesters, and it's all about the woke, right? You've heard this over and over. Well, now they're blaming the bank collapses on woke ideas and policies. And I just wanted to play a couple clips about that. First, can you even define woke? Well, yesterday on the show Rising, Joy Gray broke the brain of her guest, Bethany Mandel, by asking her to define wokeness. Take a listen to this cringe-inducing moment on TV yesterday.
Of Americans consider themselves very liberal, and probably fewer of them consider themselves to be woke. And so, when we talk about traditional,
what does that mean to you? Would you mind defining woke? Because it's come up a couple times, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So, woke is sort of the idea that this is going to be one of those moments that goes viral. Woke is something that's very hard to define, and we've spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of the understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. It's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite.
Oh, that was really, really tough. Tough stuff, but absolutely worth it. Thank you, by the way, to longtime listener Adam Sullivan, who sent that to me right when I was putting the show together. Perfect timing, Adam. Thank you. And speaking of wokesters, Chris Hayes had a great rant for about 3 minutes I'm going to share with you last night on a show on MSNBC, talking about how when Republicans can't come up with a better reason as to why something terrible happened, like deregulation of the railroads and of the banks, they've been coming up with it's because of the woke. It's so transparent, so pathetic, so very, very dangerous. And I think Chris Hayes does a really good job in this 3 minutes from his show last night.
If you were upset that the people of East Palestine got screwed, and boy, did they ever, well, the railroad company did that. The same railroads that Donald Trump, MAGA king, deregulated. If you think it's crazy that Silicon Valley Bank's big money depositors are now getting a government backstop, well, it was your guy, Donald Trump, who deregulated the banks in the first place. So the Trump-aligned Republican Party has to come up with some sort of cover story that papers over this inherent ideological contradiction. And it's not an easy task, and I have to, credit where due, tip my cap to them. Because they landed on a truly comically preposterous one. Folks, we've got an outbreak of woke banks.
This is really the first bank failure that was caused by adherence to woke beliefs and policies.
The Obama administration, Eric Holder, swooped in and imposed DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion standards on the entire financial sector. And that's one of the main reasons our big banks are now increasingly incompetent.
This bank, they're so concerned with DEI and politics and all kinds of stuff. I think that really diverted from them focusing on their core mission.
Silicon Valley Bank is a woke Biden bank. They were holding seminars on Lesbian Visibility Day and National Pride Month.
They were one of the most woke banks. They made loans to very risky ventures based more on their liberal wokeness than on the actual ability for that borrower to pay the loans back.
To be clear, This was the bank that Peter Thiel, the big Trump backer, the big billionaire right-wing dude, like his funds put their money there. This was the bank of the Silicon Valley tech bros. This bank, the woke bank. In a recent Wall Street Journal op-ed, opinion columnist Annie Kessler makes it perhaps even clearer. And again, kudos to him for that. He notes that Silicon Valley's bank's board consists of, quote, 45% women, 1 black, 1 LGBTQ plus, and 2 veterans. I'm not saying 12 white men would have avoided this mess, but the company may have been distracted by diversity demands. Wow. I guess, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth because he's not saying, but what he is saying is that the women, the 1 black guy, the 1 gay person, not to mention the 2 veterans sitting on the board are why the bank failed. It's equal parts offensive and preposterous. But, and here's the thing, it's important, it's not really meant to persuade anyone else or anyone who is persuadable. I don't think it can persuade anyone else. It's not a serious argument. It's not really even an argument. It is solely meant to keep their base in line. It is the kind of lie you tell when you must, out of necessity, reverse engineer something, anything, to spackle over the monstrously apparent contradictions within your own ideology. And the irony here is, as Josh Barrow astutely points out, there are plenty of, quote, available narratives conservatives should like about what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, they could plausibly say, for just an example, Democrats passed too much fiscal stimulus, which led to inflation, which led to rapid rate hikes that brought SVB down. Now, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's really a story. It is at least coherent. But instead...
And Lord knows what other left-wing romping was going on in these woke banks. And by the way, San Francisco Fed head Mary Daly is considered herself to be quite a wokester.
That's right. The woke wokesters almost woke the economy. Are you tracking this?
Oh, good stuff by Chris Hayes last night on MSNBC. And just one more, let's stick with MSNBC, with Stephanie Ruhle talking to Kara Swisher about this same issue. Why some on the right, including the House Oversight Chairman James Comer, are blaming the recent failure of Silicon Valley's bank on woke policies. Here it is.
There was this editorial in the Wall Street Journal today. It was written by columnist Andy Kessler, who we invited to join us on the show tonight. He declined, and explains what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. A lot of it made sense until you get to the end, where he writes, quote, in its proxy statement, SVB notes that besides 91% of their board being independent and 45% women, they also have 1 black, 1 LGBTQ plus, and 2 veterans. I'm not saying 12 white men would have avoided this mess, but the company may have been distracted by diversity demands. With us for more, my dear friend Kara Swisher, editor-at-large of New York Magazine and host of the podcast Pivot and On with Kara Swisher, and Justin Wolfers, professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. Kara, refresh my memory.
Yeah.
When the actual financial crisis happened, the entire investment banking industry was led by white guys. What was under it was the festering subprime crisis, and there was not a band of LGBTQ transgender mortgage brokers selling upside down mortgages to people across this country. What kind of nonsense argument are they making here?
It's nonsense argument. It's when I saw that, I was shocked. And the same thing that Comer was saying, he's completely ignorant. Silicon Valley Bank, for a long time, it was a joke in the Valley that it was all men that were running it. A lot of women VCs wanted to get on the advisory panel and they were locked out. They never got on it. There's nothing woke about this bank. It was very, I would say libertarian, maybe, if you had to pick something, but not particularly political. This was about bad investments or investments they held on to. They got caught in a squeeze, essentially. And to do this is just a ridiculous, nonsensical right-wing talking point that makes no sense. This was just about finances and about what's happening in the economy and their exposure in that regard. To do this, I don't even understand it. It's just a talking point. Everything is a woke something. Woke AI, woke banks, woke pancakes next, I'm sure, something.
All right, woke pancakes, Kara Swisher. There you go. All right. Well, and then in a related kind of story or moment, this went viral yesterday when ESPN analyst, former NFL star, former Heisman Trophy TED talker, really smart guy, Desmond Howard. He was on a plane and he claimed that a passenger on his flight tried to get him removed from the plane because he said he was sick. And he posted this video to his Twitter account. And he had a mask on, but he pulled it down to describe what happened to him before the flight took off. The caption read, quote, "An entitled passenger tried to get me removed from American Air flight because I was, quote, sick. To justify his request, he told the supervisor, 'I'm sure my status is higher than his, so you should remove him.'" Of course, Desmond Howard is a black guy, and not positive that was at play here, but I'm not sure why else he thought his status, this big white guy, big white guy. Anyway, he took this video after he asked the flight attendant if he could switch seats.
So I'm on this American Airlines flight, and before we took off, the supervisor comes up and she speaks to the guy sitting next to me. She said, "You want to talk to me?" He said, "Yeah, I think you should remove this gentleman from the plane because he's sick." Talking about me. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're a doctor?" He says, "Well, you've been coughing all over the place." This is before we even took off, right? I said, "Well, you can leave the plane and take another flight because I'm not leaving." All I was doing was clearing my throat. So Carroll, the supervisor, she's looking, and guess what card he tried to play? He said, "I'm sure if you check our status, my status is higher than his." So I said, "Carroll, yeah, check our seats and let me know whose status is the highest." And as you see, I'm still sitting on this plane. As a matter of fact, we're in the air right now. The caucasity of him, unbelievable. All right, everybody, you guys have a happy Sunday. Peace.
Oh, I just love it. I mean, he had the greatest opportunity in the world if he was an arrogant bastard, which I'm guessing he's not, but he could have been like higher status. I won the Heisman Trophy, motherfucker. I played football at the highest level of college and the professional game. I gave a TED Talk. I wrote a book. I survived you, this caucastic motherfucker. I don't know if he wrote a book. Don't fact check me on that, but he probably did. That's Desmond Howard on an airplane, and I just thought that was worth sharing. So there you go. Cheers, Desmond Howard. You're an American hero for that, for making that video. And now finally, let's get to some good news. And for that good news, it's our intern, Odessa's son, out there in Wisconsin. Take it away, Odessa. You're on.
Pete, yesterday the Environmental Protection Agency announced for the first time the federal government will require utilities to remove from drinking water 2 toxic chemicals found in everything from waterproof clothing to dental floss and even toilet paper. Which means this doesn't apply to you, Pete.
What?
Because you don't even use 2 out of the 3 things. Oh. And I'll let the listeners know which ones those are.
I have tons of waterproof jackets. Go ahead.
Anyway, the administrator of EPA, Michael Reagan, said that the government intends to require near zero levels, a class of chemicals whose names are impossible to pronounce, but known as PFAS.
Right.
Exposure to the chemicals have been linked to cancer, liver damage, fertility, thyroid problems, asthma, and other health effects. And that is the good news for you.
Thank you. Yes. It's not linked to anything else, just cancer, liver damage, fertility, thyroid problems, asthma, and other health effects. That's all?
No, nothing else to worry about. No, nothing else.
Well, thank you for the good news. That is good news, and well done. I like how you pronounce administrator. I think that's the best way to pronounce it. Well done. I was trying to make fun of you for saying that I didn't use toilet paper, and I think I bombed. Thank you, Odessa.
Thank you, Pete.
All right, well, that is your good news for today, and that is the news recap for today as well. And now time to get to my guest today. who is an old friend of mine, of the show, an old SiriusXM listener and subscriber, and then he became a really trusted caller, and then a regular guest here on the show. And it's wonderful because he's just one of your favorites, and he does it for the love of the game. He's not trying to make a career in media or punditry or commentary. I'm pretty much the only show that he does like this, although others are welcome to talk to him. We love talking to Bill Boyle. We had a great conversation yesterday. I hope you'll follow him on Twitter at Bill B in DC. He is a business owner in Washington, D.C., where he lives with his wife and his son, although he is on his way. Little trip to Ireland, the homeland, with some of his friends. And so that's where we started our conversation, and I'm always excited. I think you're going to love this. It was a really good one. We covered a lot of ground and really interesting. I learned a lot, as I always do. I think you will as well. Let's take it away with Bill B in D.C.
All right, we caught him just before he sails to the homeland. Bill Boyle, thank you for joining us. You're going to Ireland in a couple of days?
I'm going tomorrow, actually. Yes.
Why are you going to be in Ireland for St. Patrick's Day?
Yeah, although I hate St. Patrick's Day. For me, St. Patrick's Day was a holy day of obligation where you went to church in the morning. It was not the 1960s version of fucking SantaCon, right? and so, yeah, literally in my family, we always called it amateur drinkers night, because all the idiots went to New York, drank shit tons of green beer, and it all over the village. So we're never a big fan of that. So I'm actually going to Belfast because I've never been there. It's the only place in Ireland I've never been. I'm with a couple guys I went to college with, and we're going to walk around and look at the murals, excellent Guinness, and avoid everything related to St. Patrick's Day we can, which, as you can imagine, in Belfast is not exactly what you'd imagine it would be in Dublin.
Well, I don't know the difference between St. Patrick's Day in Belfast and Dublin, and I don't know why you would assume that anybody does outside of you and a few other Irish folks. But that being said, what is the difference? And you knew you were going with you're acting like you and your buddies from college didn't say, hey, let's go to Ireland be there during St. Patrick's Day. Don't tell me that discussion never happened.
No, what happened is it was the only week we could go between everyone's schedule. We actually actively tried to avoid it, but it turned out that it was the one week where 4 or 5 of us could actually make it. I mean, one guy's coming from Finland, another guy's from California, another guy from Ohio. Everyone has a busy life. So this turned out to be the weekend.
Some people will assume you're going overseas to develop an asset.
Or kill one, yeah, but that's personal. I prefer not to get into that. Belfast is still 50% Protestant, and a lot of those Protestants are super pissed off. And there's all the issues with Brexit, and they think that Joe Biden is trying to force them into Ireland, and so there's a lot of tension and a lot of whatever the Scots-Irish term for mishigas is. There's a lot of it right now. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to have to mind our P's and Q's, I think.
Will you be dispatching any reports back to us here at Stand Up with Pete Dominick? Will you sit down with some people there and ask them their views on America?
I may, although if I send you anything, it'll probably be a monologue. I feel a little weird about being in a pub with some drunken.
But fine. Don't see it as an obligation. But if it occurs to you that someone's interested in, say, hey, would you mind if I recorded, your thoughts on a couple things? I won't say your name. It's just there's a very popular podcast that I'm a regular contributor to, and I'm here and I want to get some Irishman or woman's thoughts on. For example, what do they pay attention about our country? Do they know how divided we are? I have thoughts about. I would have questions, so I'd love to hear what you would ask them.
Right. Well, it'll be easy because there is a very large stand-up community in Belfast. Which
I would imagine.
Sure you know.
I would imagine.
Obviously. Yeah. I'm sure the Red Hand Commandos of the Ulster Volunteer Force are listening to us.
I wonder what the biggest podcast in Ireland is.
So the one that I've been listening to in preparation for this trip is called The Moon Over Water, which was an article that Orwell wrote. It was the name of his putative favorite pub. And it's one of those beautiful Orwell essays where he talks about this pub he hangs out in, which turns out to be purely mythical. But the podcast is all these people from England who it seems like all drink far too much, but are literary, theater, radio people, and they tell you what their favorite pub would be. And so I think Belfast is full of those pubs. And obviously, these guys are telling these stories with hilarious drinking anecdotes.
That sounds really, really fun. Will you be sharing any of it? I'm not that you should feel obligated, like on social media or anything, like pictures of the inside of pubs. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, 1,000,000,000% I'll do that.
Okay,
yeah, 100%.
great.
I mean, it's a really, in the way that Detroit is a place that is really great for pictures, so is Belfast. You know, ruined empire right. Porn. Might
hollowed out.
Yeah, it's a pretty rough town. I mean, it's a rough town. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Everybody tells me how awesome it is. But, you know, this is a place, it's a gray Northern European city that went through an actual civil insurgency for 30 years. And that just ended recently. So it's tough. It's a tough place. And that, I think, will make it more poetic and beautiful, actually.
Well, we all look forward to hearing more about your trip. How long will you be there?
Thursday to Monday.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
If anybody's in Belfast listening to this, I'm sure if you hang out at the Crown Pub, you'll see a bunch of Americans walk in and order all the beer.
Or assassinating another spy. Or making a swap of diamonds for cash.
Yeah. Diamonds are overdone. Yeah,
okay, so there are two other things that I wanted to talk with you about, and we all are grateful you're here and hope you have an awesome trip. Can't wait to hear about it. But we want to talk about this D.C. criminal justice reform bill that the federal government, including the Democratic president, overruled. The bill was product of years-long review that involved all kinds of stakeholders in the criminal justice system. It was passed by the D.C. Council unanimously. It was vetoed by the mayor, Muriel Bowser, who is a Democrat. Her veto was overruled by her opposition. And then somehow, I don't know what happens next. It gets to the federal government. But what are your thoughts on this? Who should I be talking to about it? And how divided are folks in D.C. who are generally liberal or progressive over this?
So I want to start out this conversation with the observation that the reason D.C. does not have home rule is that after the Civil War, white people in D.C. realized that black voters were going to be the most powerful bloc, or at least the kingmakers of D.C. politics. Yeah. And that's why D.C. lost home rule back in the 1870s. So everything that you need to know begins with that fact. And there's a great book called Chocolate City that everybody should read. And it's this amazing book about the history of D.C.'s home rule. And it's the most absurd and ridiculous story because it's so obviously about race and so obviously about class, and how after the Civil War, this very southern town went apeshit, and the federal government, full of often very conservative and pretty racist, senators and congressmen, went along with that. They said, "Oh my God, we can't have brown people ruling our capital, meaning, in other words, not their capital." That mentality persists, and it's done in a gentler way. It's said more oblique justifications are given for it, but that mentality completely persists. DC 15 years ago decided to rewrite its criminal code, which has never been reformed in the modern era. And when I say never been reformed in the modern era, I mean things like crimes are not fully defined or defined at all in our legal code. In other words, when you say carjacking, there's not 5 sentences that say this is precisely what carjacking means. So when a prosecutor goes to bust somebody for carjacking, he has to look at previous convictions and previous cases in order to justify coming up with an idea of what that crime is that that person committed that can be defined as carjacking. It's absurd. Every major jurisdiction in the United States has already done this, probably did it 25 years ago, where our actual criminal code describes precisely what it is rather than it being open to interpretation. And beyond that, a lot of our laws were made in the light of Congress leaning on the city and saying, in the 80s in particular, saying, too much crime, you got to go and crush this. So our carjacking statute tops out at 40 years for carjacking. And it's ill-defined, which means that you've got this incredibly harsh sentence, which, by the way, if you go to West Virginia, guess what they don't even have a carjacking statute in West Virginia, right? Whose senators have been railing against crime-ridden D.C. and it's changing, and how we're weak for changing this law.
Also, they mostly have stagecoaches.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the stage jacking, I guess. The law in West Virginia, the average person who gets busted for carjacking, guess what they normally go to jail for? How long?
I have no idea. they don't have
10 years.
Well, the point you're making is a really interesting one. I don't know how obviously you pay close attention to this. It's your home, but you're just pointing to one crime and its lack of specificity in statutes, and to illustrate a larger issue with the criminal justice system in your town. And that's just the beginning of it. What about the question regarding the folks who live there in D.C. and their thoughts about crime?
Right, and this gets to that because we have this 1980 statute against carjacking. It's 40 years max. What the law was going to do is define different types of carjacking. You and I shove each other, I grab your car, or better yet, I just jump in your car and leave. That would have been the lowest level of carjacking. A weapon was involved. Add 10 years to the charge. There was nuance and gradations going to be put into the system that would have allowed a prosecutor to really define, okay, this is a nonviolent carjacking. This is a violent carjacking. This is carjacking with a gun, right? Each thing getting more serious, et cetera, right? Because what happens now is you get a jury in D.C., and I'll get to how people feel in D.C. Get a jury in D.C. that this town people are sick of crime. Frankly, they don't remember what crime used to be like here. Okay, crime here went down 8% from 21 to 22, down 8%. Now, certain crimes went up, carjacking went up, guns went up, right? Everything else basically went down. And when I say that carjacking, there's a lot of carjacking. It went up.
Does carjacking
100%.
always mean that someone comes up to you while you're in or around your car and takes it from you? Because what is just car theft?
Exactly. So you actually bring up something that
it sounds very bad and scary when someone comes up to you and holds a gun and says, get out of your car. But that's what I think of a certain type of
a good bunch of our carjackings have been a DoorDash guy going to a building to deliver food and leaving his car running unattended in front of the building.
He should not do that.
And of course, that's crazy. That's crazy. But it happens. And so this is my point, is that because we get jammed up, even though people here are really exercised about crime, really exercised about it. The point is that when your prosecutor goes in front of that jury, and he says, yeah, the DoorDash guy was delivering egg foo young to this apartment. He left his car running in front of the building. And this 17-year-old kid saw this unattended car, unlocked, running. He jumped in and took off in it. He drove for 8 blocks, and then he jumped out and left it, right? Which is a fair number of our carjacking crime. And
that was all the DoorDash guy needed because he was already having a hard enough day. Now he can't even do his job.
That poor fucking bastard. I mean, no, I am not in any way understating how much that sucks.
I know. Go ahead. I'm just making jokes about that situation, but go ahead.
No, yeah, and you read about these guys who are like, I can't believe it. They took my car. I just left it out front for a minute. Yeah. And A, you're like, you idiot. And B, you're like, oh, this poor fucker. I mean, it sucks. But when you're in front of that jury with that 17 or 18-year-old kid and the prosecutor has to charge a 40-year potential sentence, and, the judge is the one who defines what the sentence is going to be, but the jury goes, I can't fucking do this, right? Like, I can't do this. It's too much for the crime that was committed. And so, and that's the point, by the way, like the rules that they were going to put in, the new laws they were going to put in, were actually going to hit people with what is actually being sentenced now. 24 years for violent carjacking is about average now, and that was going to be what the charge is going to be. So the larger point of all this is that this was a 15-year process. Were there things in the law that I didn't like? Of course. Could we have gone back and changed those things? Would we have? Yes, we could have. But we're not allowed to do that. Congress says, fuck off, throws it out. And we're stuck back with our law system that dates from the 1950s that is inadequate, undefined, and bad for the city and makes it harder to fight crime. It's a completely ridiculous thing. And when Biden when Biden supported the killing of our law, and the mayor supported it, both of whom are people, I know the mayor, I know of Biden obviously well. I love them both. I think they're great. It shows you how much the polling on this must scare the crap out of these guys. We are in a crime meltdown right now. And that is pushing the politics in a very particular way. And I got to tell you, Mayor Bowser, if this didn't poll awfully, she would have said fine. She knew she was going to lose when the city council was going to overturn her.
When you say crime, we're in a crime meltdown right now.
Yes.
You mean this country is in a
panic, a moral panic about crime.
Yeah, I mean, because taken in context, it's all this stuff is completely reasonable, and so many of these reforms are great solutions, but you don't need any context. This is an age-old tactic. You know, you read any article about this, and everybody's analysis is the same, and it's true around the country, that if Democrats are perceived as, quote, soft on crime, they'll lose elections. And, you know, as long as Republicans are saying that crime is worse than it's ever been, even though you're looking around in your neighborhood and it's the best it's ever been, it doesn't matter, because if you hear about one crime, it just becomes, you know. So I hate that phrase, by the way, soft on crime. But I mean, that analysis is accurate. It's that Democrats are worried about being perceived as, quote, soft on crime, right? I mean, isn't that always been the case?
And the overriding thing right now for the White House is
soft on crime by lowering 40 years to 24 years, and which thus puts it in line with other similar communities across the country. But given in context, it looks like you're lessening the sentence, because technically it is, but you're only matching it to other places to make it not be so brutal for conservative people to have to home and feed people that they shouldn't have to. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's absurd. And by the way, like most of the people that you saw on the Hill bloviating about how this law was so terrible, in almost every single case, the laws in their home state and their district were actually much less draconian than DC's are now or were going to be. And the hilarious part is, guess where the crime theft capital of America is? What congressional district?
It's got to, I don't know. Oh, it's Kevin McCarthy's.
Bakersfield, California.
Yeah, there's that new documentary that Colin Kaepernick, I think, did.
And guess what states have higher crime rates than anywhere else in the country? All Republican states, including D.C., higher than D.C.
I don't want to go off on too far of a tangent, but I mean, like, there's so many experts on this issue, but I just generally believe, and I've talked with friends about this all the time, like this idea of punitive measures for crime being the simplification of it all, and locking people up being a simplification. It's just so, it doesn't even begin to address solutions that would both save money and lives and make places safer. And I just can't stand that we have to have this tiny little conversation about tough on crime or soft on crime, and that we're still doing this when the guy who murdered all those kids on that Norwegian island is in, like, you know, a minimum security prison. He'll be locked away, mostly likely for life. But I mean, like, it's just the way things are done in different parts of the world. There's so much, not everywhere, that's for sure. But sorry. Okay.
That's okay. So wait, one last thing about this that really is hilarious is what one thing makes carjacking more violent and easier to do, or makes murder more violent and easier to do? What's the one thing?
Well, so guns is always the thing, right?
Bingo. And we have been forced by the Supreme Court and by Congress to keep liberalizing our gun laws in the city.
Right.
And as you know, I just missed, but happened in my earshot across the street from my house, some jackass shooting and killing a homeless guy while he was out walking his dog with his concealed carry pistol. That murder never happens if we're not forced to allow concealed carry. These carjackings are much easier to do because gun laws in DC have been made much softer because Congress. So these assholes are actually literally making crime worse in D.C., getting cars stolen and people killed. And it's the Supreme Court doing this, and it's Republicans in the Congress doing this. And yet they're the same people turning around and going, I can't believe you guys are so soft on crime.
Right.
It is utterly infuriating. And the sad part is my neighbors, a lot of them are freaking out about crime. It fucking works.
Yes. Oh, no, it happened. I mean, we saw the election here in Rockland County where Mondare, well, he wasn't up, but because he got gerrymandered out. But Sean Patrick Maloney lost a Democrat in a district where a Democrat has always won because of that issue, because they ran ads and they scared the shit out of my neighbors who we live in one of the safest places in America, having that be an issue. And nobody even knows anybody who has been, you know, a victim of violent crime in my town because it's so foreign, as it is in most affluent places. Anyway, let's get to the final issue I obviously wanted to talk with you about. I think we have talked since it's been a year anniversary, I think. Have we? But I wanted to just...
No, we have not.
Have we not? I don't know. I talked with Bill Browder. I talked with Rothkopf. I obviously want to get your perspective on a year in, but I think it's also imminent, and I certainly want to get the soundbite of your reaction to there being a fight for the Republican nomination on the issue. Well, first, who's the most anti-vax, but who's the most pro-Putin or anti-Ukraine or anti-NATO or ignorant of history. But Ron DeSantis making these comments yesterday in response to a right-wing conspiracy theorist who uses words like demons, Tucker Carlson, the Alex Jones of Tucker Carlson's. And he put out a poll asking all the nominees or people running for president potentially what they would do vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine. And at this point, most folks have heard Ron DeSantis' position. I know you have, and I just wanted to get your take on what we're seeing play out in the presidential campaign for Republicans vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine.
I mean, I was happy to see DeSantis take the most responsible and long view position on Ukraine. And obviously, I'm fucking kidding. The guy's an asshole. It's the worst thing he could have possibly said. Ron DeSantis guaranteed that more Ukrainians are going to die. That's the blunt truth of what just happened, because Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, one or the other, is highly likely to be the Republican nominee in 2024. What that means is that Russia's bet on trying to extend the war until there's an American president who won't support Ukraine has a chance of actually working out. If Trump and DeSantis said, fuck it, we're staying in here until Ukraine is in a solid position and will remain independent of Russian domination, the Russians will start thinking about negotiating. They don't have to now, because all they have to do is last until 2025. Now, they may not last until 2025, but they are going to redouble their efforts to hold on to everything they possibly can, because now they see, excellent, we have a fissure in American politics, a wedge, and we can try to break that wide open to save ourselves. So these guys, there's Winston Churchill said something great about Chamberlain in Czechoslovakia. He said, your choices were dishonor or war, and you chose dishonor, and you're going to get war anyway. Right. And I'm paraphrasing it.
Right.
But it's just true. This is not going away. Russia wins in Ukraine. The Russians are saying overtly Moldova's next. They're saying they're going to challenge us over the Baltic states. They're saying this overtly. Putin is saying it. Lavrov is saying it. Peskov is saying it. The elite guys in charge in Russia are not stopping at Ukraine. So these guys are like, oh, we don't want to risk war because if we support Ukraine, that's going to do that. They're just making a bigger war in the future almost certain.
What kind of an effect do you think it has? And I know this is pure analysis, but it's based on the past, when one party and one media arm, the most influential in all of media, and many on the right in media, are pro-Putin. What effect does that have on Russia's future analysis about how they should interfere in our election as they have in the past, knowing that the outcome of the election would help them in such a huge way as it did when Trump looked the other way and looked like he worked for Putin? I mean, what analysis do they take when they hear Ron DeSantis say this and they know it's either him or Trump, most likely, that gets to be the nominee? Do they say, you know what, we should invest more in the campaign for whoever the guy who supports us is? Because that wouldn't be unprecedented.
So, Pete, I'm not an intelligence officer or a propagandist, but if I were both of those things, I would tell you that if you're Russia, you're looking at potentially a regime-ending situation they're in right now. If they lose this war, the guys in charge right now could end up 6 feet under, or they could end up in house arrest in their 80s, and they could end up in The Hague. So they rolled the dice in a big way. Now they're stuck in the position of a degenerate gambler who keeps doubling down his bet and has to keep on doubling down to try to stay in the game. They're completely incentivized now to intervene even more dramatically in American elections, because the only way, if they're going to intervene at all, if they're going to try to influence that at all, the only way they get away with that is if there's a friendly regime in the United States who just wipes that under the rug. So they are incentivized. The game theory on this, if you're Russia, is go for it. Go all the way. Because why wouldn't you? You're not, if Biden wins again, you're fucked. You're fucked. And so they're going to go for it. They're going to go for it. They're going to do everything they possibly can. I have some strong doubts about their ability to deliver on that. I don't think it is what it was in 2016 or 2020 for that matter. But of course they're going to go for it. They have to. It's existential.
What do you think has changed?
What's changed are two things. Number one, the American voters are much more aware of all of this than they were. You had a lot of liberals who were hearing about Hillary Clinton and going, oh my God, what the fuck? Then by 2020, even though a lot of the things in Hunter Biden's laptop turned out to be true, whether they're relevant or not, they were certainly salacious and a lot of it was true. Nobody really gave a shit. The game had been played before. And people were automatically suspicious of falling for what they felt. But no,
you're saying Russia's past interferences and the types of things that they did weren't as effective and wouldn't be as effective. But I'm seeing something completely different. To be clear, I'm talking about the electorate as a whole. The MAGA people, they'll fall for everything and anything. But the electorate as a whole, independents, Democrats, Republicans who aren't MAGA people, that's much harder. But what's different this time, maybe not on the question of Russian interference, is that Russia doesn't really need to do anything because the right-wing media is doing it for them. And you see actual Republican congressmen and now some senators, not the majority of them, it wouldn't seem, to start to be turning as well away from the war in Ukraine. And as long as Tucker Carlson and the others are doing that, I'm not sure Russia has to do much.
Sure. And that cancer, though, is fully internal to us. That's our own tumor.
Yeah. No, indeed. Indeed it is.
The other thing, by the way, that's the sort of sub rosa part of Russia trying to do this. There's a thing if you go back to like 1935 and you look at like Nazi propaganda. It was super effective, really well done, really split their enemies, encouraged their allies, created a lot of American worry about going to war in Europe, etc. 1938, 1939, they invaded Czechoslovakia. Their propaganda didn't do shit for them anymore. You can only do propaganda that's really effective if you're not an absolute fucking obvious villain. And Russia is absolutely obviously a villain. Like even their friends are not all that. And the Chinese aren't going like, wow, the Russians are great. In fact, I was reading a study about TikTok in China and social media in China. I guess that's Weibo, and people's Chinese reaction to Russia, these are not pro-American Chinese, was like, God, these guys are clowns and they're butchers and they suck and they're crude and they're nasty. And, so it's just, they're not in, remember too, they're managing to get their ass kicked in a war against someone who's a third their size. So that also goes against the sort of idea that Putin is this master strategist who can, spin the world on his finger every time he wants to. That's now gone, and that will never really come back.
Okay, so I want to get to the war as it is a year in, and as we head into the spring, you follow very closely what's happening there on the ground. But before I do forget, Andy in Nyack, who listens, which is right around the corner from me. How have we not met, Andy? Have we? He says, when is Bill B going to be on again? I can't wait. Please ask him about the Wagner Group in the Ukraine war. Also, please ask him about Russia becoming a vassal state to China. Thanks for doing what you do. Thank you, Andy, for the email. Bill, what do you want to say to Andy?
Thank you, first of all.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you for saying thank you to Andy.
Very, very kind of you. As far as Wagner and China with Russia, Wagner is in a weird position because it's not in the defense ministry of Russia, of the Russian government, but it's obviously, a paramilitary group that answers to Putin. Wagner is a tool that Putin uses that allows him to do things he couldn't do otherwise, that would be difficult to do otherwise. I have been reading that Wagner had 45,000 men under arms 5 months ago, 6 months ago. That number may be down to only 7,000 right now. They are getting absolutely chewed up, mostly by sending prisoners and other zeks, other people who have no, people they just scooped up from prisons and anywhere else, and shoving them towards the Ukrainian lines. And the plan, the method is that I send 50 morons with old rifles towards the Ukrainian lines, and then I see where the Ukrainians are killing them from. And then I artillery the shit out of those places. And that is awful, sort of effective. It's also not so great when you start running out of men, A. And B, they're running out of shells. Russia's running out of barrels and it's running out of shells. They still have a lot, but the days when they were firing 10 artillery shells for every one the Ukrainians were firing is over. And they're firing them with far less precision and much less capable spotting and all that sort of thing. So Wagner is, I think, mostly a shot bull. I think Wagner maintains a core of highly effective people that they held back on purpose for, because they want to maintain their power and their sort of combat strength around Prigozhin, who is the guy who on paper runs Wagner. But I think politically they're done because Prigozhin tried to take over the defense ministry and lost out.
Yeah, he wants a bigger job within.
Yeah, he and Kadyrov and this one Russian general, they tried to push out Shoigu and Gerasimov, who run the defense ministry, and they lost that fight. Putin looked at these guys and went, "Ooh, ambitious. Get him out of the way."
Oh, right.
So now Putin doesn't want some guy as his defense minister who has like the ability and the ambition and appetite for power.
Right.
He wants a functionary there, obviously. Right. And that's
right.
where, and that's a good way to look at Prigozhin. You hear about this guy who runs Wagner. Man, he's
good way to look at a lot of corporate executives and powerful people in general. But yeah.
Right. But I mean, you look at this guy and you hear like this guy, sort of like how Putin was such a genius all the time. Prigozhin, look at him. Look at all these things he's doing.
Yeah.
He made the most fundamental mistake you can possibly make in an authoritarian regime. He started to present himself as a threat to his boss.
Right.
And so I think Wagner is kind of done. They're going to be around forever, but and they never were a war-winning thing in this war anyway. And I'll just talk about the war in general if I can for a minute, and then go back to what this means with China and Russia. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So a couple of things that have been sticking out to me. Number one, it's turned out that Russia just bought 300,000 artillery shells from Iran, which says everything about where Russia is and its ability to produce artillery shells. And the Russian army lives on artillery. So if their own stocks and their own production is so low, they're going to Iran, they're in a world of fucking trouble. And as you and I could probably guess, I don't think Iranian artillery shells that probably date to the Shah era in some cases are all that great. So they're going out to the market and getting the 1975 Datsun of artillery shells to try to continue the war. Second thing is that in Bakhmut, for a while at least, they were taking 7-1 losses.
Yeah, I've been reading about
dead.
They're getting pounded.
Right? That's probably a little more equal than it was. Another fact that jumps out at me, they're running out of T-72 tanks. T-72 tanks were their tank that was their high-tech tank starting about 1975. They built until about 1985 or 90. They're replacing them with T-62s, which is a tank that went out of production in 1975. So as the Ukrainians are pulling in, Strykers and getting Leopard tanks and getting M1s and getting all these other more modern T-72s and 82s from Eastern Europe, the Russians are going back to a tank that we would have thought was not worth using in Vietnam. We're talking a 40-year-old, 50-year-old design. And the other thing that jumps out at me is, have you heard anything about another mobilization? No. And so where we are right now, Russia has not done another mobilization. Putin probably can't afford to politically. So where we are right now is very much where we were last year, where the Russians ground themselves to death on the Donetsk. They pulled back from Kiev and they tried to gain all this ground and then to get all of Luhansk and Donetsk, those two oblasts. And they're grinding up all of their power. They're using artillery shells and their men and their vehicles. Remember, they're taking all this logistical hits. Somebody told me they think they've lost 2,000 trucks, which are crucial in the last 6 months. So Russia is doing just what it did last year. It's burning itself out in the Donetsk basin, and the Ukrainians are building brigades. When people you see exactly like last year. It's hilarious. 3 months later last year, everyone was saying, "Oh, you're reading these New York Times articles and Post articles about these guys fighting these Ukrainians, talking about, we don't have enough artillery. We're losing men. The government's not supporting us, blah, blah, blah." Literally exactly what was in the media last year in June. Do you think that's a coincidence? No, it's partly true because Ukraine is starving Bakhmut because they don't want to use the units they're building up for an offensive to defend a town that actually strategically is completely insignificant, except for the fact that the Russians are beating themselves to death against it. That's the only reason. Ukrainians could back off of Bakhmut and go to the next city. It's Chasiv Yar is another city right behind it that's on hills. Behind that, there's a Konstanty Nivka, is another town behind that. I mean, this doesn't do anything except burn Russian material and men. It's the only reason Ukraine's there. When they decide it's not worth it anymore, they'll back up. And what's happening in the background is Ukraine is building up brigades, training them on tanks, training them on new artillery. They're what they're calling culminating force. They're building up force. And so what's going to happen very likely is, again, another 1-2 punch. They'll hit the Russians on the right flank. They'll hit the Russians on the left flank. Probably not some big dramatic American-style offensive, but they'll lean on a couple of doors until one falls through. And then when that door falls through and the Russians have to go and try to stop them and move men around, they'll kick the other door in, just like they did with Kherson and Kharkiv. So this year, I think you're going to see some pretty dramatic changes to this war that are going to go in Ukraine's direction. Now that gets to what happens with Russia and China. Because China was going to probably start to help Ukraine. Unfortunately for the Russians are so penetrated by American intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, all the rest.
It certainly would seem so.
Well, I mean, think about how secret it must have been in Russia that China was going to start sending you bullets, bombs, maybe aviation. That was a crown jewel secret. Well, the U.S. a couple weeks ago says, oh, hey, this is Tony Blinken over here at the State Department. Everyone needs to know China's about to do this.
Yeah.
If you're China, you say to the Russians, you fucking idiots. Like, we were going to start to help you, but we can't take this hit because we have so much trade with the U.S. and Europe. We can't do it. Now, I think they will, sub rosa, do some of this. But that probably killed any chance Russia had of getting any real serious aid from China this year. Which means that China probably is in a position where they probably lost the war again, unless you get a Republican in the White House, right? If it looks like the Republicans win, and it looks like they're going to win in 2024, the Russians may just kind of hold on by their fingernails to whatever they can.
Right.
But if you're China, do you look at Russia and say, oh, these guys are a peer ally? No, and they already don't. Russia is done, and the longer Russia stays in this war, the more they become effectively an appendage of Chinese power. That being said, I don't know how much that really changes so they already are a junior partner with China. And, in the same way that, North Korea is a junior partner of China's. And does that really make China a lot stronger? No, it probably is a pain in the ass, and it probably drains their resources. So I do think that is going to be the ultimate outcome of this, is that Russia is the Austria-Hungary to China's Germany. And it'll be exactly the same relationship. Though, as the Germans said about the Austro-Hungarians, they were handcuffed to a corpse. And that's what is going to happen, I suspect, in the medium to long term. If Russia holds together, which is not, if they lose this war, that is not guaranteed.
The only other real specific question I wanted to ask you was when I read that yesterday was the bloodiest 24 hours for Russia, Russian soldiers, since, I guess, another day where they lost almost that many. It said numbers, and I don't know where we get these numbers, but over 1,000. And I was just wondering, as morbid as I was looking up the numbers of dead, how many American soldiers died in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's around 7,000. It depends on how you count. 30,000, over 30,000 have committed suicide. So I think that matters, but worth mentioning. But the point is 1,000 in a day. Like, we can't fathom that. If that was reported, and if 1,000 Americans lost their lives in a war, it would, I guess maybe it's not even worth comparing our reaction versus theirs. My question more, you can answer that, but is how do 1,000 guys die? Is it, as you mentioned earlier, being used as human decoys for, so they can sight their artillery? Is it a multiple, is it all kinds of ways? Is it missiles and bombs? How do 1,000 guys die in this war? And I don't know. I would think we could see all kinds of videos and stuff. And I'm not saying that I'm looking for that at all. I'm not.
They exist, and you don't want to look at them. I've put myself in a diet of looking at those videos because it's kind of morbid and sick to watch.
Yeah, I don't think that does anything good for you.
So to give you a sense of how you lose 1,000 people a day, and I suspect that's just Bakhmut, basically.
That's just this one area.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Ukrainians are saying 1,080, which is a very specific number. Who knows? You know, in the woods of northern Ukraine, people are dying and no one's counting them.
Right.
So to give you some sense of it, on Tet, the first day of Tet in Vietnam, we lost 250 dead. On
American soldiers,
D-Day,
250 died. That was one of the highest numbers of that entire conflict.
Oh, my God, yeah.
If not
totally.
right?
Well, and then on D-Day, we lost 2,500 men.
Different war and different time, but still an important number.
Guys assaulting a beach in the teeth of machine guns.
Yes.
I mean, couldn't be any harder to do, right? The Russians are losing these guys for two reasons. The first reason is that as this war has gone on and their army has degraded, they have perforce been pushed back into older styles of combat. If you don't have this integrated artillery system and information system that's feeding where the enemy is and what's happening, and the commanders can do all this subtle and supple tactical maneuvering in order to make it a better attack, instead, you lose all of those systems, and you maybe never had them in Russia's case, then things fall apart, and eventually you're down to saying, Yuri, you take your platoon and walk across that field. And Yuri was a tax accountant in Omsk 6 months ago and doesn't know shit. He's holding an old rifle and he's in wet boots and he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know who the Ukrainians are, and he walks right into things. You can find online fields. I just saw a picture the other day. It's 57 Russian Mobics dead in this old sunflowers field just from like a week ago. So you have people who don't have any tactical ability. Now, then look at the other side of it is, so Russia has what's the word I'm looking for? It's gone back in its tactical ability and its military ability. The other side of it is that Ukraine has gone forward quite fast. So the Russians in the past, you'd be going against this trench and the guys on the other side would have to look out to see where you were, right? Well, imagine if they have drones.
Right.
Or imagine if an American satellite is literally reading the epaulets of the Russian guys who are forming up to attack, and they're coming and you hit them with artillery before they even come. So you have a situation where Ukraine, because of the intense American intelligence operations, because of drones being used really effectively, and not just, by the way, drones are not just being used effectively for surveillance. They're using drones to kill these guys, like drones dropping grenades on these guys as they're forming up to try to come across. So you have this really enormous difference in capability and in just the way they look at how to fight. Wagner's a little better, but in general, the Russians are being. There's a term. It's the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And that is the way military people think of how they conduct operations. Being inside somebody's OODA loop means that you observe, orient, decide, and act faster than they do. Which means that's like if you're in a boxing match and I think about punching you and I'm so slow, you can see it coming and smash me in the face every time I'm about to hit you. That's actually like a pretty accurate description of what's happening in Ukraine.
Right.
And when that happens, the side that's too slow gets slaughtered. None of this is surprising anymore. I mean, we've seen that how incapable the Russians are, and none of this is surprising. And they're going to lose a lot more men.
I just read this Washington Post article that Ukrainian officials have run more than 8,600 facial recognition searches on dead or captured Russian soldiers.
Yep.
In the first 50 days of the war, they did that. So it's a lot number bigger now. They use the scans to identify bodies and then contact the hundreds of families. And I mean, that's a propaganda win, because part of the thing is, I'm sure they're not doing it out of the kindness of their hearts, but it's because if the people know these are real people losing their lives in this needless, senseless war, maybe that creates some kind of something. I don't know. That's what I'm guessing is why they're doing it.
So a very, very smart guy that I know who works he's a senior advisor to not the U.S. military, but another country's military. He always loves to say war is communication. A bullet is communication, a bomb is communication, and that is communication that you just described.
Right.
You're that 1,000 guys dead in front of Bakhmut. That tells the Russians something quite dire.
Yeah.
And by what the Ukrainians are doing, by actually contacting families and pushing that, injecting that back into Russian society, they're just adding more spice to the message. And again, that gets it. We were talking about how the Nazis seemed like so powerful propaganda-wise before they invaded Czechoslovakia, and then they sucked after that. It's because once you get to a certain point where you provoke a people the way the Russians, that the Germans provoked the Brits, the Americans, and everybody else. Well, the Russians have done that to the Ukrainians. The average Russian is apathetic. He's not motivated. In the Ukraine, that sort of stuff started happening, where they were calling families and saying, we captured your son. That was private people just self-organizing and doing it. And so, Russia is a giant in population and economy relative to Ukraine. It's a midget in terms of commitment and creativity and the willingness for everyone in the society to fight.
So it would seem.
Yep. And the struggle of our time as Americans is to make sure that our fucking government does not back off. Because the longer we stay in this, the longer we support the Ukrainians, the sooner this war is over. And it's that simple.
Yeah, the foreign policy struggle of our time. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It would seem. All right. Well, listen, I'll let you go. I hope you have an awesome time in Ireland. We'll miss you. We look forward to your pictures. And as always, we thank you very much for, I don't know how you know all this shit, but I certainly appreciate you letting me record you say it.
I'm a drinker with a reading problem. That's what it comes down to.
Well, one of those things will.
I'll do both in Belfast.
All right, buddy. Thanks.
Cheers.
There he goes. Everybody wish him a great trip, a great voyage. Bill B. in D.C., thank him for joining me here on the show. Thank you to you. Thank you to Odessa, the intern. Thank you to Pete Coe. Thank you to John Carroll. I hope to see you tomorrow night at our hangout. If you're not already a subscriber, then you should sign up right now. Lots of really exciting things that I'm working on to come, and I can't wait to share them with you. If you've got ideas for the show, guest ideas, segment ideas, anything you want me to talk about, a clip, send it my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I will talk to you right here tomorrow. Thank you very much. I love you guys. You're the greatest. Bye-bye. John Carroll, take us away.
Trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be told to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up, people got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand